Liz had one weekend to walk the property, sign the papers, and go back to her life in the city. The estate was falling apart. The vineyard was dead. And the diary she found in the basement was supposed to stay unread. It didn't. Liz's car rolled slowly down the winding road that led to her grandfather's estate, tires crunching over gravel strewn with fallen leaves damp from the morning mist. She had imagined her arrival in Napa Valley as something cinematic, sunlight cascading over perfectly trimmed vineyards, birds gliding lazily above the rows of grapes, and the estate gleaming with polished wood and the lingering aroma of wine barrels. Instead, the scene that greeted her was a stark testament to neglect and time's unyielding passage. The fences, once precise and straight, sagged in awkward angles, broken planks jutting into the air like desperate fingers. Weeds crawled unchecked over stone walls and paths, weaving a tangled carpet of green that threatened to swallow the long-forgotten garden sculptures and cracked fountains. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, rotting leaves, and the faint, sour tang of spoiled grapes clinging stubbornly to gnarled vines. The manor loomed above the valley like a weary sentinel, its paint peeling in long strips, windows grimy and dull, reflecting a sky muted by heavy clouds. Every step Liz took along the overgrown paths carried the weight of history and abandonment, each footfall a reminder that she was now the inheritor of a life's work that had fallen into decay. Her heart, poised to treat this visit as a transactional obligation, began to tighten with something else, an unspoken pressure, a sense that she was stepping into something larger than herself, something that demanded attention, care, and perhaps even reverence. She parked her car on the edge of the estate, boots sinking slightly into the soft soil, and paused, letting her gaze sweep over the ruined grandeur of what had been her family's pride. Her initial plan, clear and merciless, assess, sell, leave, faltered under the oppressive presence of history and legacy pressing in from every direction. Liz hesitated before the front door, running her hand over the weathered wood, feeling the deep grooves etched by decades of life, love, and loss. The interior was silent except for the distant creaks of settling floorboards, the whisper of wind through broken panes, and the occasional groan of the old house as it shifted under its own weight. Dust motes danced in the soft, gray light filtering through the windows, settling over stacks of ledgers, old photographs, and forgotten bottles of wine long past their prime. Liz's eyes were drawn to a corner of the study, where a worn leather journal, its cover cracked and softened by age, sat beneath a pile of papers. The initials on its front, embossed faintly, revealed the unmistakable mark of her grandfather. She picked it up carefully, the leather warm and familiar in her hands, smelling faintly of aged paper, soil, and the subtle sweetness of fermenting grapes. Each page she opened revealed a fragment of a life she had never fully known, a meticulous record of vineyard conditions, weather patterns, pruning schedules, notes on grape varietals, and reflections on patience, perseverance, and the essence of life itself. Liz lingered over the handwriting, tracing the flowing letters as though each curve carried the pulse of her grandfather's presence. Time slipped away as she read entry after entry, feeling a strange, intimate connection to a man whose voice had always been distant, almost mythic in her childhood memory. The estate outside seemed to awaken as she read, the wild vines, broken fences, and empty rooms suddenly resonating with the energy and care that had once animated every corner of the property. Selling, which had seemed so practical an hour ago, now felt like a betrayal. Liz felt a stirring of responsibility she had never anticipated, a sense of duty not only to her grandfather, but to the land itself, which seemed to hum with potential beneath the neglect. As the sun dipped behind the distant hills, long shadows stretching over the vineyards and broken stone paths, Liz closed the journal with reverence, pressing it to her chest. Her mind, previously set on escape, now churned with the enormity of choice and consequence. Could she restore the estate, save the vineyards, and honor the life of a man she had only just begun to understand? Or should she retreat to the city, leaving behind the tangled roots, the dust, and the decay? The wind whispered through broken windows, carrying the scent of wet earth and stubborn grapes, a reminder that life could still endure here, in the care of those willing to fight for it. Liz's resolve hardened with each passing minute, her heart both burdened and buoyed by the inheritance she had once considered a liability. Every detail, from the creak of floorboards to the rustle of leaves against her boots, from the smell of mildew to the distant call of a bird over the valley, pressed upon her, demanding she make a choice. With a deep inhale, tasting the damp air rich with history and possibility, she made her silent vow. She would stay, confront the challenges, restore what had been lost, and discover not only the legacy of her grandfather, but perhaps the legacy within herself that had lain dormant for far too long. The night crept in, velvet and cool, over the sprawling estate. Liz stood in the doorway, the journal still clutched tightly, and watched as the first stars blinked awake in the sky. Somewhere deep within the darkness, the vineyard seemed to pulse with anticipation, whispering that the story, hers and her grandfather's, was only just beginning. She stepped inside, feeling the weight of the past, the pressure of the present, and the unformed promise of the future all at once. Her journey into the heart of the estate, into the legacy of the man she had loved from afar, and into the very soul of the land itself had begun. Every shadow, every broken stone, every wild vine spoke to her, urging her forward, and Liz, for the first time since her arrival, felt a clarity she had never known. She was exactly where she was meant to be, and nothing, neither debt, nor decay, nor doubt, could make her turn back. The morning sun cast a pale light over the tangled vineyards, illuminating the scars of neglect on the once proud estate. Liz stepped carefully along the edge of the property, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth as she examined the broken fence that separated her land from the neighboring vineyards. Each post was splintered, leaning precariously, and the wire that had once marked boundaries now hung loose, twisted like the fingers of some forgotten giant. She crouched to inspect the damage, her fingers tracing the jagged splinters of a post. The neglect felt personal, an echo of the years she'd spent away. A shadow fell over her, and she turned to find a man standing a few yards away. He was tall, with the weathered skin of someone who lived by the sun's schedule. He didn't offer a corporate smile. He simply watched the way she held the wood. "The soil here remembers your grandfather," he said, his voice low and grounded. "But it won't wait much longer for you to decide if you're a guest or the owner." He stepped forward, not to shake hands, but to steady the leaning timber she was holding. "Figuring out?" he repeated, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You have land here, vines planted by people who loved this valley. You can walk away, but it won't leave you alone. And honestly, neither will the land." Liz felt a strange pull, a sense of recognition not in face but in presence, in the way he moved, deliberate and unhurried, as if he belonged to the earth itself. She opened her mouth to reply but stopped, realizing words felt unnecessary. Gideon's gaze flicked to a vine struggling under the weight of a cluster of shriveled grapes, a pest gnawing at the leaves. Without hesitation, he knelt, fingers deftly examining the plant, tracing the damage, and extracting the insects with the care of a surgeon. "Here," he said, handing her a small sprig. "If you want these vines to survive, you'll need to treat them right. Not with chemicals, not with shortcuts. Patience, attention, and respect." Liz's chest tightened, the words resonating more than she expected. She had come seeking distance, control, and a quick resolution. But here was a man teaching her, challenging her, opening a door to something she had not even known she wanted. The hours passed as they moved through the first rows of neglected vines, Gideon instructing, Liz learning. They worked silently at first, the only sounds the crunch of earth underfoot, the occasional bird call, and the wind rustling through the leaves. As the day progressed, words began to fill the spaces between actions, stories of the valley, of his family, of decades of winemaking, and of choices that had shaped both land and life. Liz realized that their differences, her pragmatic, city-trained mind versus his grounded, rural wisdom, did not divide them, but sparked an unexpected connection. A subtle energy wove between them, an intellectual spark that drew her in despite her caution. By the time the sun began its descent, casting long golden shadows across the rows of vines, a tentative partnership had formed, fragile but potent. They stood at the edge of the property, sweat-damp hair clinging to their temples, hands scraped and stained from the day's work, yet eyes alight with the satisfaction of progress. Liz, who had planned only to observe and decide, found herself laughing softly at a shared anecdote Gideon had told, the sound foreign and liberating in the still valley air. "You make this look easy," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Though she knew the compliment was incomplete, ease had nothing to do with it. Gideon smiled, a slow, knowing expression. "It's never easy," he replied, "but worth it. Every bruise, every scrape, every sleepless night watching these vines, it's worth it." Their gazes met, and for the first time since her arrival, Liz felt a flicker of something beyond duty, something dangerously personal and intimate. The boundary of her plans, her careful control, began to blur. Here, amid the damaged fences and struggling vines, a seed was planted, one not in the soil, but in the fragile, unspoken space between them. She realized that the land was not the only thing requiring care, patience, and courage. So, as the valley darkened and stars began to prick the sky, Liz and Gideon stood side by side, surveying the vines they had touched, the work they had begun, and the tentative connection that had taken root. It was a beginning neither had expected, a meeting that would alter the course of both their lives, a spark that promised warmth, challenge, and unforeseen consequences in the days to come. Liz left that day with her plans unsettled, the journal clutched tightly in her bag, and a new awareness. This land, these vines, and this man had become entangled with her destiny in ways she could not yet fully comprehend. The mornings in Napa Valley began to feel different, charged with a quiet promise as Liz rose before dawn to the soft glow of twilight spilling over the rolling hills. The estate, once lifeless, now hummed with subtle energy. The vines, their leaves dusted with dew, whispered in the wind, and the earth seemed to respond to her footsteps as if recognizing her commitment. Gideon arrived each day with the same calm determination, a presence that was steady, patient, and unyielding, a counterbalance to Liz's city-born urgency. Together, they walked the rows of vines, pruning, inspecting, and learning. Gideon showed her how to read the soil, how to detect the first signs of disease, and how to encourage growth without forcing it, the kind of knowledge that came only from years of intimate labor with the land. Liz watched him move among the vines, hands sure and precise, every motion deliberate, and she felt a stirring of admiration mixed with something she could not yet name. She began to notice the small details that made his expertise undeniable. The subtle way he tilted a vine to catch sunlight, the way he adjusted the trellises for maximum support, the way he spoke to the plants almost as if they could hear and respond. Days stretched into weeks, and a rhythm formed. Mornings were for work, afternoons for tending to the soil and vines, and evenings became a time for discovery and reflection. In the cool, golden light of sunset, they would gather in the small tasting room, dusted with years of neglected corks and the faint aroma of fermenting wine. Gideon poured old vintages, each bottle telling a story of the valley, the seasons, and the hands that had worked tirelessly to craft them. They tasted slowly, discussing the subtle notes, the interplay of acidity and sweetness, the stories embedded in each sip. "Do you catch that hint of smoke?" Gideon asked, holding his glass against the fading light. 2014 was a brutal year for your grandfather. A drought nearly choked the crop, but the vines held on, growing deeper, more resilient. Liz took a slow sip, eyes narrowing in thought. He wrote about that in the journal. He said that grapes, much like people, often find their true character only when they're under pressure. Gideon smiled, and in that expression, there was more recognition than any corporate contract could ever offer. Conversations that began as practical discussions about vineyard care evolved into debates about life, values, and what truly mattered. Liz found herself opening in ways she had not expected, sharing thoughts she had long kept hidden under layers of city pragmatism. Gideon listened, never rushing, never judging, but offering insights shaped by a lifetime of experience and a profound understanding of consequence and patience. Their laughter began to echo through the tasting room, mingling with the evening breeze, a sound foreign to the silent halls Liz had first encountered but wholly welcome. Each day of work brought small victories. A stubborn vine revived, a patch of soil enriched, a cluster of grapes responding to care and attention. These successes were mirrored in the subtle growth of their bond. Proximity bred familiarity, and familiarity bred trust. Liz began to rely on Gideon's judgment, not just in the vineyard, but in the decisions she faced regarding the estate, feeling the stirrings of a connection that transcended their professional partnership. The subtle interplay between their personalities, her sharp intellect and his grounded wisdom, created a dynamic that was both challenging and exhilarating. They pushed each other to think, to feel, to consider perspectives neither had entertained before. Nights became a sanctuary where ideas, hopes, and doubts were shared over glasses of wine. The flickering candlelight casting shadows that danced across walls lined with dusty bottles and faded photographs. Each story they told, each secret they revealed, drew them closer. Liz began to see the estate not merely as a financial burden, but as a living testament to her grandfather's life, a canvas on which she and Gideon could paint a new chapter. The warmth between them was subtle at first, a shared glance lingering a heartbeat too long, a hand brushing against another while adjusting vines, a quiet smile exchanged over a particularly challenging pruning task. It was an unspoken acknowledgement of understanding, of companionship forged in labor and trust. As the weeks unfolded, the estate itself seemed to respond to their care. New shoots emerged from the vines, leaves deepened in color, and clusters of grapes began to swell with promise. Liz felt a sense of pride, of achievement, and of belonging she had never known in the city. The work was hard, often grueling, and the sun was relentless, yet every ache, every blister, every smear of soil became a mark of progress, of transformation. The sweet period was not only in the vineyard's first signs of revival, but in the delicate, growing intimacy between Liz and Gideon. They laughed more freely, shared more openly, and found joy in the simplest acts, testing soil, tasting grapes, or simply standing together in the fading light, letting the silence speak as much as their words. It was a time of promise, of connection, of hope. Yet beneath the warmth, a subtle tension lingered, unspoken but present, a reminder that life, as in the vineyards, was never entirely without challenge. Liz could sense the edges of something larger approaching, something that would test the trust and closeness they had begun to build. But for now, the sweet period held, a delicate season of growth, both in the vineyard and in their hearts. Every day reinforced a truth Liz had not anticipated. She was no longer merely preserving her grandfather's legacy. She was living it, reshaping it, and in the process discovering parts of herself she had long neglected. The vines thrived, the evenings shimmered with possibility, and Liz realized that this chapter of her life, unexpected and unplanned, was becoming the most meaningful she had ever known. She had arrived with a plan to leave, yet she found herself staying, learning, and daring to hope, not just for the estate, but for the fragile, sweet connection she had found with Gideon, a promise as delicate and vital as the first shoots emerging from the vineyard soil. The valley's serene rhythm was abruptly disrupted the morning Richard arrived. He drove up the winding driveway in a polished black SUV, its engine cutting through the quiet like a warning. Liz spotted him from the porch, his sharp suit, impeccable grooming, and confident posture in stark contrast to the earthy, worn environment she had come to inhabit. He carried an air of authority, of someone accustomed to commanding outcomes rather than coaxing them, and his gaze, calculating and deliberate, lingered on the estate with an intensity that made Liz uneasy. "Liz Harper," he asked as he stepped out, his voice smooth, yet edged with an unmistakable sharpness. "I'm Richard Calloway. We need to discuss your property." Liz felt a tension coil in her stomach. She had expected visitors, neighbors perhaps, but never the man whose reputation for corporate maneuvering preceded him. He extended a hand, and though she shook it politely, his grip felt more like a transaction than a greeting. "I understand the estate has fallen into some disrepair," he continued, eyes scanning the overgrown vines, the sagging fences, and the manor that had once gleamed in sunlight. "It's a beautiful piece of land, Liz. Prime location for development. Have you considered selling?" Liz's pulse quickened. Selling had been her initial plan, but now, after weeks of labor and connection with the land, the proposition felt like a threat, an intrusion upon the fragile revival she and Gideon had nurtured. "I'm not interested in selling right now," she replied, her tone measured but firm, attempting to mask the apprehension gnawing at her. Richard smiled, a slow, knowing expression that carried no warmth. "Not interested or not persuaded yet?" he asked. There was an undeniable tension between them, a clash of intentions that neither could ignore. Liz glanced toward the vineyards, where Gideon was quietly inspecting the leaves, unaware of the corporate storm approaching. Richard's gaze followed hers. "Ah, I see you've met Gideon," he said, a subtle edge in his voice. "Your neighbor and vineyard consultant, I presume?" Liz nodded, uneasy. Richard continued, laying out his proposition with precision. "We're offering a generous buyout, Liz. A new resort, luxury accommodations, a chance to liquidate the estate at a fair market value. You could walk away without risk, without debt. Think about it. It's a rare opportunity." Liz felt a wave of conflicting emotions, temptation, anger, and a deep sense of betrayal. The very land she had begun to care for was now under threat, its revival reduced to a commodity in her eyes, if she agreed to his plan. She met his gaze, trying to remain composed. "I need time," she said, though she knew every moment spent away from action could allow him leverage. Richard's smile widened, but it did not reach his eyes. "Of course, but consider the value of waiting too long. Opportunity, like these vines, can wither if neglected." He left the way he had arrived, precise, controlled, leaving behind a palpable tension that settled over the estate like a storm cloud. Liz turned to Gideon, who had finally approached, his brow furrowed with concern. "He's serious," she said quietly, "and dangerous. He wants this land, and he won't take no for an answer." Gideon's expression hardened. "I know him. Richard, he's my brother." The words hit Liz like a sudden gust of wind. Her heart tightened, a mixture of shock and disbelief. The man she had begun to trust, the ally who had guided her through the first successes, was entangled in the very web threatening her estate. She searched Gideon's face, looking for any hint of deception, but found only a deep conflict simmering beneath calm eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, the sound of her voice sharper than she intended. Gideon hesitated, the weight of loyalty and love pressing down on him. "I didn't want this to change anything between us," he admitted, his tone low, burdened. "I was afraid it would make you see my help as manipulation. I care about this land. I care about you. I'm caught between both, Liz. I don't want to lose either." The revelation left Liz reeling. The sweet period of progress and connection they had shared now bore a shadow of doubt. Could she trust him? Could she separate his intentions from his family ties? And yet, beneath the fear and suspicion, a thread of truth persisted. Gideon had shown dedication, knowledge, and a bond that had transformed the estate from a burden into something alive. Liz clenched her fists, feeling the raw tension of conflicting loyalties and looming threats. The shadow of the corporate giant had entered their world, and the stakes were higher than ever. The vineyard, once a place of learning and tentative intimacy, was now a battleground for trust, ambition, and the preservation of what mattered most. Liz understood that every choice moving forward would carry consequences, not just for her estate, but for the fragile connection she and Gideon had forged. The sun dipped lower behind the hills, and the estate, bathed in the muted glow of dusk, seemed to brace itself for the battles to come. Liz and Gideon stood side by side, the weight of family, business, and emotion pressing upon them, silently acknowledging that the calm days of first success were over, and the true challenges of trust, loyalty, and resilience were only just beginning. The atmosphere at the estate shifted from cooperation to a cold, professional distance. Liz threw herself into the ledgers, her trust replaced by a restless need for control. Gideon didn't try to force his way back into her confidence. He simply stayed visible, working twice as hard to stabilize the western slope. He replaced the rotted trellises in silence, his movements mechanical and stripped of the warmth that had defined their earlier weeks. "Liz," he said one afternoon, pausing in the middle of pruning a particularly stubborn vine, "I know this makes you question everything. I would too, in your place." She looked up, the afternoon sun catching in her hair, framing her tension. "Question everything? Gideon, I don't know what to believe anymore. I trusted you. I thought you were helping me because you cared. But now," her voice broke slightly, laden with frustration and hurt. "You're family with the man who wants to take everything from me. How do I know this isn't all part of a plan? The words hung heavy in the air, charged with both fear and accusation. Gideon's hands fell to his sides, and he ran a hand through his hair, an uncharacteristic gesture of vulnerability. I am caught, he admitted, voice low and earnest. Caught between the family I cannot abandon completely and the woman I care for more than I expected. I am not here to manipulate you. I am here because I believe in you, in this land, and yes, in us. But I understand if my silence has shattered your trust. Liz stepped back, the sharp edge of betrayal slicing through her carefully constructed defenses. She remembered the first day, the light in his eyes as he showed her how to nurture the vines, the laughter they had shared during long evenings of tasting old vintages, the quiet moments when words were unnecessary. And yet, that warmth now contorted into doubt, a cruel juxtaposition against the looming threat of Richard's corporate ambition. Her heart wavered, torn between lingering affection and the sting of potential betrayal. I can't just ignore this, she said, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. You were part of the world I came to fight against, whether you meant to be or not. And I can't allow myself to be blind to that. Gideon's expression softened with the weight of understanding. I don't expect you to forgive me quickly, he said, voice measured, tinged with pain. I only ask that you see the truth in my actions, not just the connections I cannot change. I have been protecting you, the estate, and the land we both care for, even when it meant keeping my mouth shut about the depths of the family conflict. I never wanted this to come between us. I tried to stop him, Liz. For weeks, I demanded he leave you alone, threatening to sever every family tie we have. But Richard, he sees only numbers. I stayed silent because I hoped to handle it myself, to keep you out of our family's wreckage. It was a mistake, and I'm ready to pay for it if it means you can still trust what we've built here. But the damage had been done. Liz turned away, the journal of her grandfather pressed to her chest, as if it could shield her from the betrayal she felt. She walked through the rows of vines, her footsteps measured, echoing the hollow ache in her chest. Gideon followed at a respectful distance, understanding the need for space, yet unwilling to abandon the woman who had become the center of his world. That evening, as shadows stretched across the valley and the sun dipped below the hills, Liz stood on the porch, looking out over the land she had vowed to protect. Each vine, each leaf, each trembling cluster of grapes seemed to mirror her own fragility, the first cracks in trust threatening to splinter the fragile connection they had nurtured. Gideon approached quietly, his presence gentle but deliberate. He placed a hand lightly on the railing near her, not touching her, but close enough to remind her of his presence and care. I will not leave, Liz, he said softly, voice steady despite the turbulence of the moment. I will do everything I can to protect this land, and to earn back the trust one have jeopardized. But I cannot do it without you seeing that I am on your side. Liz swallowed hard, the storm of emotions raging inside her. Doubt, fear, desire, anger, and an undeniable longing. She wanted to believe him, to reach out, to allow the connection to endure despite the fractures. Yet the knowledge of his family ties loomed like a dark cloud over her heart. That night, sleep came fitfully, tangled with visions of broken vines, corporate threats, and the man whose touch had once felt like reassurance, but now carried the weight of betrayal. Liz knew that the vineyard, the legacy of her grandfather, and the fragile trust between her and Gideon were all in peril. She faced the sobering reality that the next choices she made would determine the survival of the estate, the future of her relationship with Gideon, and her own capacity to forgive. In the darkness of her room, clutching the journal to her chest, she realized the simple truth. Love and trust could be as delicate and demanding as the land she sought to preserve. And yet, despite the ache, despite the uncertainty, she could not let go entirely. Somewhere deep within, a seed of hope persisted, a fragile, trembling promise that perhaps, with courage, honesty, and relentless care, even the first crack in trust could be repaired, and the land, and their hearts, could endure. The days following the confrontation with Richard brought an undercurrent of unease that seemed to seep into every corner of the estate. Liz spent hours poring over her grandfather's documents, the weight of responsibility pressing down with each page turned, each clause scrutinized. The air in the study was thick with dust, the scent of old paper and ink mixing with the faint aroma of the vineyard outside, a reminder that the legacy she had hoped to preserve was under imminent threat. The legal documents were complex, layered with decades of property transfers, easements, and forgotten amendments, each one a potential trap for the unwary. Liz's hands shook slightly as she uncovered a subtle but critical error, an overlooked clause that, if exploited, could give Richard the leverage he needed to seize control. Panic surged, tightening her chest, but she forced herself to breathe, to focus, to consider the implications logically. Gideon appeared at the doorway, his presence steady, a lifeline in the storm of legal intricacies. "I saw your expression," he said quietly, stepping inside. "What have you found?" Liz handed him the documents, pointing to the specific clause. This is the leverage he's waiting for. If he files the lawsuit, he could bankrupt me in months. Everything we've worked for, everything my grandfather built, it could vanish overnight." Gideon's eyes darkened, the familiar calm replaced by the weight of the impossible choice he faced. "I know," he admitted. "He's given me an ultimatum. Either I convince you to sign over the estate willingly, or he proceeds with the lawsuit. Either way, he wins in some form. But I will not let him destroy everything you've fought to preserve." Liz's gaze narrowed, the fire of determination igniting within her. "And you? Where do you stand, Gideon? On his side because of family ties, or on mine because of what we've built together?" Gideon stepped closer, the tension in his shoulders palpable. "I stand with you. Always. But I am trapped between the law, the family, and the life we're trying to protect. Every move I make is under scrutiny. Every word could be twisted against us. I cannot lie. I am part of this family. But I am not part of Richard's plan." Liz felt a mixture of relief and apprehension, knowing that trust would need to be rebuilt while the clock ticked relentlessly toward confrontation. The next days became a delicate dance of strategy and secrecy. Liz consulted lawyers, researched precedents, and meticulously documented every detail, while Gideon worked tirelessly in the vineyards, maintaining a semblance of normalcy, even as the looming threat grew heavier. The tension between them was tangible, a fragile thread connecting hearts already strained by deception and familial loyalty. Nights were spent poring over legal documents by candlelight, Gideon quietly beside her, offering insight where his knowledge applied, respecting boundaries, and yet sharing the burden of urgency and fear. Liz began to understand the depth of his commitment, the courage required to oppose his own family for the sake of truth and love. Richard's maneuvers became more aggressive with each passing day. Letters, legal notices, and veiled threats infiltrated the tranquility of the estate, a constant reminder that time was running out. Yet, amid the pressure, Liz and Gideon found brief moments of connection, an exchanged glance over a stack of documents, a quiet word of encouragement during vineyard inspections, a hand brushing against another as they reached for the same page in a ledger. These fleeting gestures reinforced their fragile alliance, the unspoken promise that they would face the storm together, whatever form it might take. Liz's resolve strengthened. She would not cede control, she would not be manipulated, and she would not allow Richard's ambition to destroy the land her grandfather had nurtured. Gideon, standing beside her, became more than a partner. He became a shield, a strategist, and a mirror, reflecting the courage she sometimes doubted she possessed. As the deadline approached, tension in the valley reached a palpable peak. The estate, alive with the first signs of renewed growth, seemed to hold its breath alongside Liz, anticipating the coming confrontation. Both she and Gideon knew that one misstep could undo months of labor, hope, and painstakingly rebuilt trust. Yet they also knew that inaction was not an option. The estate, their bond, and the very future of their lives were inextricably entwined. Liz stared out across the vineyard at twilight, the rows of vines swaying gently in the wind, and felt the magnitude of what was at stake. She had survived loss and betrayal, yet the ultimate test lay ahead, a test of strategy, resilience, and the unbreakable thread of trust slowly mending between her and Gideon. In the stillness of that evening, amidst the rustling leaves and fading light, Liz resolved that no matter the challenges, no matter the threats, she would fight. Not just for the vineyard, but for the fragile, powerful bond she and Gideon had forged in sweat, soil, and shared conviction. The legal trap had been set, the ultimatum delivered, and now, the stage was prepared for confrontation, courage, and the revelation of truths long kept in the shadows. The night of the charity gala arrived with a deceptive elegance. The grand hall, adorned with crystal chandeliers and polished oak floors, shimmered under the golden light, filled with Napa Valley's most prominent vintners, investors, and philanthropists. The murmur of conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the soft strains of a string quartet created an atmosphere of refinement, yet beneath the surface, currents of tension rippled. Liz moved through the crowd with controlled poise, her evening gown flowing around her as she greeted familiar faces and extended polite smiles. Every gesture was measured, every conversation a careful negotiation between appearance and apprehension. Her heart raced with anticipation, knowing Richard would be present, his ambition and cunning hidden behind a charming exterior designed to disarm and manipulate. Gideon arrived shortly after, dressed impeccably, yet his eyes carried the weight of sleepless nights and the burdens of loyalty and love. He offered her a brief nod, a silent promise that he was by her side, ready to confront the storm together. As the gala progressed, Richard's presence became more pronounced. He moved through the crowd like a predator in a carefully orchestrated hunt, his charm polished but sharp, his words laced with subtle insinuation designed to unsettle Liz. When he approached, his smile was both welcoming and threatening, a reminder of the leverage he held. "Liz," he said, voice smooth and measured, "the vineyard is thriving, but imagine what could be accomplished if we work together. Think of the profits, the prestige. You could walk away enriched and unburdened." Liz met his gaze steadily, refusing to betray the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "I am not interested in selling," she replied firmly, the conviction in her voice carrying across the space between them. Richard's smile tightened imperceptibly, his eyes scanning the room for allies or witnesses to manipulate, but Gideon's presence was immediate and unyielding. Gideon stepped forward, placing himself subtly between Liz and Richard, his posture calm but resolute. "This conversation is over," he said, voice carrying the quiet authority of someone willing to take a stand. Richard's gaze flicked to him, a flicker of surprise evident before his composure returned. "Ah, Gideon," he said smoothly, still the loyal brother. "But loyalty can be flexible, can it?" The air grew thick with anticipation, whispers circling the room as onlookers sensed the unfolding tension. Liz's pulse thundered in her ears, but she remained composed, trusting in Gideon's unwavering support. The confrontation escalated when Richard, growing frustrated, attempted to corner Liz, subtly introducing legal threats and insinuations meant to undermine her confidence and force compliance. "Think carefully, Liz," he warned, voice low but dangerous. "The law is not on your side. Time is limited. Decisions have consequences." Gideon's response was measured, cold, and final. "You underestimated us both," he said, his voice cutting through the room's ambient noise. "An hour ago, digital copies of your internal reports and the evidence of your undisclosed conflict of interest were sent to the lead investors and our shared legal counsel. What you called an opportunity is now officially documented as coercion." Richard's face paled as he noticed several influential figures in the room checking their phones, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disdain. The public revelation was merely the final chord. The legal trap had snapped shut long before we entered this hall. The night, intended as a superficial display of wealth, became a crucible in which truth, loyalty, and courage were tested, and Liz emerged not only as a rightful steward of her grandfather's vineyard, but as a symbol of integrity and resilience. As the gala drew to a close, the tension dissolved into cautious celebration. Liz and Gideon stood together, the weight of the evening's events settling between them, a shared understanding of what had been at stake and what they had achieved. The first steps toward recovery, reconciliation, and preservation had been made, but the journey was far from over. Trust, hard-won through courage and transparency, had been restored, yet the echoes of betrayal, legal threats, and familial conflict lingered as reminders that vigilance and unity were essential. Standing side by side, watching the last of the guests depart under the star-strewn Napa sky, Liz and Gideon allowed themselves a moment of quiet triumph. They had faced the storm together, not as adversaries, but as allies, their bond strengthened, their resolve unwavering, and the vineyard, like their partnership, poised for renewal and the promise of a future shaped by truth, courage, and shared commitment. The morning after the gala, the Napa Valley air was crisp and sharp, carrying the faint scent of grapevines and morning dew, but Liz could barely notice. Her mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, the adrenaline and relief of the previous night now giving way to an ache she could not ignore. Every corner of the estate seemed to echo with reminders of the confrontation. The polished hall where Richard's schemes had been revealed, the murmuring crowd of vintners and investors, and Gideon's unwavering presence at her side. Yet, despite his courage, despite the evidence he had uncovered and the risk he had taken to protect her and the vineyard, a shadow lingered, a shadow of silence, secrecy, and unanswered questions. She moved through the estate with meticulous precision, her hands touching the vines, her eyes tracing the rows that stretched into the horizon, each one a living reminder of her grandfather's labor, legacy, and love. The morning light felt intrusive, exposing the exhaustion etched into the vineyard's rows. Liz didn't look for the shared glances that had once made the labor feel light. She looked for discrepancies in the soil reports. She felt the vibration of footsteps before she heard them. Gideon didn't call out her name. He simply stood at the edge of the row she was pruning, his shadow stretching toward her like an unwanted bridge. He held a rusted shears he'd found in the dirt, a silent reminder of the decades of secrets this land had buried long before they arrived. "Liz," he said softly, careful not to startle her. "I." She straightened abruptly, the tension in her shoulders betraying the storm inside her. "No, Gideon. Don't. I can't, not right now. I can't trust what I feel or what I think. I don't know where my instincts end and your family's influence begins. I can't." Her voice faltered, thick with a mixture of anger, hurt, and longing. The words hung in the crisp morning air, sharp and final. Gideon's eyes softened, reflecting a deep, aching understanding. He had expected resistance, feared it even, but the reality of her pain struck him harder than any threat Richard could have posed. He stepped closer, maintaining distance, not wishing to pressure her, yet desperate to bridge the chasm growing between them. "I did what I thought was right, Liz. I exposed him. I stood against my own brother for you, for the vineyard, for what is ours to protect. I never wanted you to feel betrayed. Every choice I made was to preserve what matters most: your safety, the estate, and us." Liz shook her head, tears threatening to spill, her gaze fixed on the rows of vines that had been both her sanctuary and her battlefield. "I know, Gideon. I know what you did. I saw it. And yet the silence, the secrets, the fact that I discovered your family connection this late. It feels like a knife twisting slowly inside me. How can I trust when the foundation of what we've built feels like it could crumble at any moment?" Gideon's jaw tightened, his own heart constricting with the knowledge that love, courage, and loyalty were not enough to heal the wounds of mistrust overnight. "I understand," he whispered, voice nearly lost in the gentle rustle of leaves. "I will give you the space you need. I will not leave, but I will step back. I only hope that one day you can see that my actions were never about manipulation, but about protection, about fighting for you and the vineyard in the only ways I knew how." Liz turned away, the journal of her grandfather clutched to her chest, a fragile shield against the ache of betrayal and the turbulence of her emotions. She wandered through the estate, tracing the familiar paths with her fingertips, each touch a silent prayer, each step a testament to the commitment she had to preserve what her grandfather had built. The vineyard, the legacy, and the future demanded her focus, and yet her heart was heavy, filled with sorrow for the connection she had cherished and now could not fully embrace. Gideon lingered at the edge of the vineyard, his figure steady, a quiet sentinel against the encroaching shadows of doubt. He knew that some trust could only be rebuilt through time, through unwavering consistency, and through acts that proved loyalty beyond words. The hours stretched into evening, the golden light fading to a muted twilight. Liz sat in the study, surrounded by the smell of aged paper and the lingering warmth of the day, the journal open before her, her thoughts a tangle of strategy, sorrow, and cautious hope. Each document reviewed, each legal nuance considered, reminded her that the fight for the estate was far from over. Yet even as she pored over the technicalities, the ache of her fractured trust echoed louder than any legal threat. Outside, the vineyard swayed gently in the evening breeze, as if the land itself was grieving alongside her. Stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, faint and distant, yet steadfast in their presence. Liz allowed herself a moment to breathe, acknowledging the pain, the confusion, and the uncertainty, but also recognizing a fragile spark of determination within her. She would not relinquish the vineyard. She would not bow to fear or manipulation, and she would face the challenges ahead with courage. But for now, the loss of trust, the ache of separation, and the weight of unspoken truths created a chasm she could not yet bridge. In that quiet, vulnerable night, Liz understood the depth of the trials she and Gideon would have to endure, not just in defending the estate, but in mending hearts strained by secrets, loyalty, and the relentless pressures of family and fate. The vineyard remained, steadfast and enduring, a silent witness to their struggle. And though hope felt distant, fragile, and uncertain, it persisted, a quiet ember awaiting the moment when courage, truth, and love could reignite it fully. Liz held the journal close, feeling the pulse of her grandfather's legacy, and whispered softly into the night, a promise to herself, to the land, and to the bond she could not yet fully reclaim. She would fight. By mid-afternoon, the horizon had turned a bruised, sickly purple. The barometer in the study dropped sharply, mirroring the sinking feeling in Liz's chest. She didn't need a weather report to know the valley was about to be tested. The air grew preternaturally still, the kind of silence that precedes a disaster, and she found herself standing in the center of the yard, calculating the cost of a lost year in heartbeats rather than dollars. The debts, the legacy, the vineyard itself, all balanced on the edge of ruin if this night went wrong. She moved among the rows with methodical precision, securing nets, checking trellises, reinforcing stakes where the soil threatened to loosen, every action driven by equal parts fear and determination. The storm's first warning came as a distant rumble, vibrating through the earth, and she flinched, heart pounding. She had anticipated challenges, but nothing could fully prepare her for the raw force of nature poised to undo months of labor in a matter of hours. Gideon appeared without announcement, his coat flapping in the wind, eyes dark with concern and determination. "I couldn't stay away," he admitted, rushing to her side. "If we're going to save this harvest, we do it together. No arguments, no delays. We fight for every vine, every cluster, every ounce of fruit." Liz's jaw tightened, conflicted by lingering hurt and the relief of his presence. "I don't know if," she began, but the wind tore the words from her mouth. Gideon grabbed her arm gently, his grip firm, unwavering. "No time. We move now." Together, they plunged into the storm's first assaults, the rain lashing their faces, the wind tearing at their clothing, soaking them to the bone. Hands raw, muscles burning, they worked side by side, weaving nets, securing fragile vines, salvaging what could be saved. Their earlier conflicts, their misunderstandings, and their fragile trust were irrelevant now. Survival demanded unity, focus, and the silent acknowledgement that each moment could mean victory or loss. Hours blurred as they fought against nature's onslaught. The vineyard, usually a place of calm, became a battlefield, each vine a soldier demanding protection. Liz and Gideon communicated with nothing more than glances and gestures, the storm leaving no room for words, no space for hesitation. The bond between them, strained by secrets and mistrust, began to mend in the crucible of shared struggle. At one point, a particularly heavy gust threatened to uproot a section of newly trellised vines. Liz froze for a fraction of a second, terror tightening her chest, and Gideon was instantly at her side, anchoring the posts, his strength and presence steadying her as much as the vines themselves. Exhaustion weighed on them, muscles screaming, lungs burning, yet they pressed on, driven by love for the land, for legacy, and for each other. Hours passed, the storm's fury unabated, until finally, as dawn began to break, the clouds thinned slightly, and the rain lessened to a relentless drizzle. The vineyard bore the marks of the night's struggle, some vines bent, some leaves shredded, but the core of the harvest remained intact, a testament to human determination and resilience. Liz and Gideon collapsed beside each other among the rows, bodies shaking with fatigue, faces wet with rain and sweat, but hearts racing with a mixture of relief and quiet triumph. In that exhausted, soaked silence, all the barriers between them, distrust, fear, and past hurts, seemed to dissolve. Gideon reached for her hand, fingers entwining with hers, and Liz met his gaze, seeing not just the shared hardship, but the unspoken commitment, the promise of partnership forged in the crucible of the storm. They spoke little, words were unnecessary. The act of survival, the shared sweat and struggle, conveyed more than conversation ever could. In the muted light of early morning, amidst the battered but resilient vines, Liz allowed herself to believe, to hope, and to feel that the bond they shared could endure even the darkest storms. The vineyard, though tested and battered, had survived. So too had their connection, renewed and strengthened through the sheer force of necessity, courage, and trust rebuilt in the most extreme circumstances. As the storm finally moved east, leaving a battered but living landscape behind, Liz and Gideon stood together, surveying the rows of grapes, the fruits of their labor and courage. The valley exhaled, the air now carrying the fresh scent of rain-soaked earth and promise. They had faced devastation and emerged victorious, but more importantly, they had faced each other, confronted their fears, and rebuilt a foundation of trust and love that neither storm nor treachery could undo. The night had been their crucible, and together they had emerged not only as stewards of the vineyard but as partners, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring with unyielding resolve. A year had passed since the storm had tested every ounce of their strength, every measure of their determination, and every thread of trust between them. The estate, which once stood on the brink of ruin, now breathed with a new vitality, the air itself charged with the energy of a landscape reborn. Rows of lush vines stretched under the bright Napa sun, their leaves vibrant, the fruit heavy and ripe, reflecting the culmination of labor, patience, and unwavering dedication. Liz moved among the vines with a sense of ownership that transcended mere property. Every stake, every trellis, every carefully tended cluster bore her fingerprints, her sweat, and her relentless commitment. Beside her, Gideon worked with equal intensity, his presence steady, his movements practiced, yet never losing the gentle awareness of her proximity and her well-being. The air was filled with the scent of ripe grapes, the earthy undertones of fertile soil, and the subtle whisper of wind through leaves, a symphony of life, growth, and hard-won triumph. They had weathered legal battles, the manipulations of Richard, moments of mistrust, and the near loss of the harvest itself. Yet all of those trials had forged a foundation stronger than any challenge they could face alone. In the main building of the vineyard, a gathering of neighbors, investors, and friends assembled for the first tasting of the new vintage. The atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation, pride, and a hint of celebration. Glasses clinked, conversations buzzed, and the subtle notes of the wine, aromas carefully nurtured through the year, filled the room. Liz and Gideon moved among the guests, presenting the fruits of their year-long toil with quiet confidence. Each pour was a story, each taste a testament to perseverance, and each compliment from the attendees a recognition of the land's revival and their stewardship. Richard stood by the heavy oak doors, his presence no longer an anchor for the room's attention. He held a glass of the new vintage, swirling it with a clinical detachment that couldn't mask the way his gaze avoided the thriving rows beyond the glass. Liz didn't cross the room to confront him. She didn't need to. The silence between them was the final verdict. She turned back to the guests, the weight of his old threats dissolving into the background noise of a vineyard that had finally outgrown his reach. Gideon's hand found hers, fingers intertwining, a silent affirmation of the journey they had shared, the battles, the storms, the fragile beginnings, and the unyielding determination to protect what mattered most. In their eyes, a quiet understanding passed, acknowledging both the trials endured and the love and partnership that had emerged stronger than before. The tasting continued, with laughter, toasts, and conversation mingling seamlessly with the aroma and taste of the vintage. Guests marveled at the quality of the wine, unaware of the battles fought to bring it to fruition, yet Liz and Gideon knew. Every sip, every bouquet, every note carried the weight of history, struggle, and triumph. By the evening, the event had settled into a gentle rhythm, guests departing with expressions of awe, respect, and congratulations. The vineyard, bathed in the golden glow of sunset, seemed to exhale, as if relieved and proud to have survived and thrived. Liz and Gideon stood together on the veranda, surveying the land, the rows of vines, and the distant hills of Napa. The quiet between them was comfortable, filled not with uncertainty or mistrust, but with a shared sense of accomplishment, peace, and hope. They had preserved the legacy of her grandfather, secured the vineyard against threats both natural and human, and nurtured a bond tested by fire and storm, but strengthened beyond measure. As twilight deepened into night, lanterns flickered along the paths, casting gentle light across the vines. Liz took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of ripe grapes, damp earth, and the faint sweetness of fermentation, a promise of the future and the realization of dreams long nurtured. Gideon leaned close, voice soft, carrying the warmth of shared victories and love. "This is just the beginning, Liz," he said, eyes reflecting the lantern light, the horizon, and the promise of all that lay ahead. Liz smiled, squeezing his hand, her heart full, her mind at ease, and her spirit unburdened. "Yes," she replied, the word carrying the weight of the past, the triumph of the present, and the hope of a future built on resilience, partnership, and enduring love. Together, they watched the vineyard breathe under the star-strewn sky, a living testament to the power of perseverance, courage, and unwavering commitment. The final vintage had not only restored the vineyard but had restored them, to themselves, to each other, and to the promise of all that life could still hold. The family name had been redeemed, and the future, unburdened and bright, unfolded before them like the golden haze over the Napa Hills, promising peace to those who had been brave enough to fight for it.